Chad.
Morning.
I'm Jason Stapp.
And I'm Chad Davis.
I talk about accounting firm stuff on the
And
internet.
I've got an accounting firm in Canada. And apparently live in an RV.
And this is accountant support. Come on in. Welcome. Let's support each other. So something I don't feel like we talk about much
Whatever.
is pretty much all the decisions I've made have been through the lens of how's this going to work for the old family? Or not work for the old family? Or what about the current circumstances doesn't work for the family?
The real boss.
The real boss. And so I don't feel like we talk about that much in our decision-making framework. But usually, like most of my big decisions have come down to something about the current setup isn't working.
Yeah, or something looks quite fun. And I want to go try to do that thing. So you can look at it through both lenses.
What's an example of that?
Oh, let's get into that. Yeah, you're right. We do not talk about that enough. And I think it's becoming more and more popular. More and more. Can I say that 3 times? More and more popular for people to prioritize the things in their life than the things in their work. And it's a pretty important topic.
Okay, so why don't we cruise through the various iterations of our careers and how the family factor informed that decision making. Let's get in the old Wayback Machine.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, my work life, the first 10 years of my work life was working in a firm for somebody else, which I think is what makes most people want to go out and start their own accounting firm. I got super burnt out doing U.S. tax work and just the seasonality of that and just the work itself I didn't super enjoy.
You could have tried Canadian tax work. It might have been nicer.
No. But ultimately it was like, can I really see myself doing this for another like 20 years? Most definitely not. That was what led me to transition to starting an accounting practice in the firm. Was that just seemed like a more enjoyable, sustainable thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a stage of life where that was totally fine. Like my 20s were like, what else am I going to do if not work? So there was very much a stage for me where it was like, oh, if I work more, then I'm getting ahead. And maybe there was a degree of truth to that. I don't know that it was that much ultimately because I was still working for somebody else and helping them to get ahead. But I did have a stage of life where it was like, what else am I going to do? I may as well work my butt off. Did you have that stage of life?
I like the work. I don't know. When I was starting out, I would take to any place that would give me something new to try out. So I kind of went from, a job during university to a job doing some accounting work. And then as soon as
like private accounting.
Yeah. And then when I was designated, then I kind of pieced out to the Caribbean islands and kind of learned a lot on the job there. So there was an element of work hard. I think there's nothing wrong with that. Taking advantages of opportunities when you're younger, whether you work for the same place and get a whole bunch of experience or you move around a couple places. I like the idea of kind of working hard and trying to figure out what you like.
What do you think of sweaty culture like falling out of style? Have you noticed that? And COVID I think helped with that too. But like now there's this like toxic sweatiness sort of vibe where in many ways, and maybe this is a US thing, I feel like it's never been less cool to work a lot. Would you agree with that?
Cool or not, I think companies are reacting to that too. So you do see a lot more companies prioritize, at least on paper and publicly, wellness and flexible working arrangements. Now in practice, whether or not that translates into sweaty or not is to be determined. But I mean, it's cool to see so many changes happen so quickly as a result of that pandemic.
Which is interesting because right now in early-ish mid 23, we're actually like the big trend the last couple of months is folks saying, quote unquote, the remote work experience is done.
Who's saying that?
Sam Altman said it this morning or last night. But one of the big four just said everybody needs to 50% come back to work now. And now that we're post-COVID, I wonder if, I don't know, I wonder how associated that wellness focus and remote work is. Like, I wonder now if we're actually trending back in the wrong direction toward that sort of sweaty machine.
So anyway, when you say that stuff, it feels like sweeping generalizations.
Yeah.
Everyone should. We need to. There's not very many people saying what's right for this company is what they should be doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the approach that a lot of companies will take, but the news can capture the sentiments of the big company and project that on to the market as a whole. So regardless of what people say, we are ultimately, and I say we as the collective human beings, can decide what's important to us and sort of seek that out. And wow, like what a time to be able to seek something out now where there's a lot more options because the eyes have been opened. I don't know if I've seen enough of that sweeping, hey, come back to the office, to push certain people back, even though they might want it. There is more people that are looking for jobs elsewhere, and the pool of remote work companies has gotten greater.
Mhm.
But at the same time, there's like nothing wrong about going into the office or people that want to go into the office. I think that's the key, is like finding that place that fits your life cycle for your stage in your career, for your stage in your personal life, and for your own priorities. It's nice that there's a bigger pool now than there was 5 years ago.
It's one thing that I never really liked about the hybrid setup is it didn't feel like you were like, well, it was hard from just managing sort of two very different groups of people. But like, I also think it's okay to like be for a very specific type of employee.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of folks that just love and are energized by working in person, and that's totally fine. And there's people that are the opposite or can't do that because of life circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But to bring us back to how we've kind of our family decision making framework. Yeah, when I was working for someone else, like when I was doing tax work, I eventually pulled the plug on that because I just didn't enjoy that very cyclical nature. Like the entire notion that, and even like non-accountants know this. They're like, "Oh, you're a CPA. Oh, that's why you're not at the soccer game in March."
Mm.
And I'm like, I can choose to do anything with my life. Why don't I build it around something that, and tax work does have flexibility for all but the part of the year where it has zero flexibility. And so I kind of got to the point where I'm like, there's got to be something else that I can build my life around that doesn't have those limitations. So I transitioned to accounting work, but ultimately, I didn't like more control and freedom was what ultimately led me to like, I'm either going to go start my own practice or buy this practice to, I guess, let me have more agency over how I crafted like my days and my schedule and what I wanted my job to be. And that actually happened. Let's see, that would have been just after I had my first kid, which is like you're kind of thinking through a whole lot of things when that happens, and being on the other side of that kind of rewires your brain a bit.
Was
But
that around 2018-ish?
yeah, so and the second one was on the way at that point. So that was probably the first like because before that it was like, what else am I gonna do? I'm just gonna work a lot. And I do enjoy my work, so it's not, I didn't see it through the lens of like I was subject to this necessarily. But that was the first really like family driven decision where I'm like, okay, this is actually going to put me in the driver's seat where if I'm missing things, it's ultimately my fault. But on the flip side, I ought to have control to be able to have like more flexibility in what I can engage in.
Mm-hmm. And did it work out?
For the most part. And to be honest, that was actually one thing I appreciated about buying a practice was being able to like manage that machine in a way that wasn't 100% reliant upon me.
Mm.
So it like whether I got out of bed in the morning or not, everybody was still going to be working, which is obviously, if you're the only one doing the work, is not going to be the case.
Right.
And so at that stage in life, for me, that was something I appreciated about buying a firm.
Yeah. We talked earlier about the hybrid versus fully remote. So just to recap, when you bought this, this was a company that had an office in the US and you would go in every day. When did that switch over to either hybrid or fully remote or fully office? What is the situation over the period of when you bought it to, where we are today?
So it was an 80-year-old tax practice, and all that stuff happened in the building. And a few years before I bought it with a partner, uh, I started an accounting practice that was a virtual practice. So the tax practice was always in person,
Mhm.
and that got a little more sticky during COVID, uh, and they started pulling some hybrid people into there. But the accounting practice was always remote from day one. So they're two very distinct teams,
Mm,
and one largely didn't know the other existed. But that was a couple of years before I bought it. I started building that team.
mhm. When you think about the remote nature of what you were building versus the tax practice that was in office, ultimately what worked better for your family in the long term? Was it the ability to stay remote and to be at home sometimes, or the flexibility to go into the office? If you rolled this all up into like what worked best for Jason, what did that sort of last few years look like in office, at home? How did it affect your family?
What I was ultimately managing both. So like it wasn't as if I started a virtual team and can just be like, I run a virtual team. No, it was like I was running a virtual team, but I was also running a physical office.
Mm,
But like being able to experience both, I think like my take on this may be seasonal and may be impacted by the fact we're coming out of a pandemic, but like I super enjoy working with people in person. And I like the way I approach hiring is so much energy based. Like, whether you're good at this stuff or not, like, so much about the quality of our output boils down to the energy that goes into it
mhm,
and our energy to learn and to grow and do our best work and all that. Um, and those are the folks I really enjoy working with. And I kind of seek out that energy when I hire. And that energy in a room is like super infectious. And it's been hard for me to recapture that in a remote setting. So it would be hard for me to absolutely pick one or the other, but there are aspects of in person work that I really enjoy. Obviously, staffing where you can exclusively staff in person is really challenging relative to a lot of the benefits of building a remote team. Like, in a remote team, pulling in offshore team members is just like supernatural and trivial, and like it just works.
mhm,
So there's upsides and downsides. In terms of what works best for the family, there've been I've got a really young family, and there's been aspects of remote work that have been really hard for the young family, where like the kids are not of an age where they understand boundaries and dad's got to work right now. If I'm not spending time with them and they can see me and I'm just disregarding them, like for an 18-month-old, they're like, oh, why doesn't he want to hang with me? And then all of a sudden I do want to hang with them. And it's not something they can totally get their heads around. My oldest is 6 and like she gets all that now. But that's not been without its challenges. Long term, and this is definitely a season of life with the family thing. Super appreciate the flexibility to like travel and like do a month here and do a month there with the family. And obviously that's going to work much better in a virtual work environment.
mm.
So I think having done both, like if I started an accounting practice tomorrow, it would be a virtual practice so that I could lean into offshore better, so that I could hire people from anywhere, but also to give the family the more like ultimate flexibility.
That f-
But I would still miss
I
like the
know. That's always been the best part about getting together, whether it was for retreats or we did regional meetups for a long time,
uh,
and we did like camping trips. Oh, it comes back to camping, doesn't it?
it does.
Um, like those were the things that made the virtual work environment work for us
Mm.
because we had those connections and we had that like that trust builds up and that camaraderie builds up the more that you're, together in a room, whether it's in a restaurant or a retreat or, an event or just something that is non-work related.
Mm-hmm.
And, for the longest time, I would not go to co-working days when teams would get together because I knew that I'd be the one that would want to talk about stuff and not get any work done.
Yeah.
I'd be the horrible person there that would just be like sitting there going like, so you want to talk about stuff? And it just wouldn't work out that well. So whenever those like co-working days would be over, I might pop in later and go for dinner with people or do that kind of stuff. So it was always like the most wholesome and enjoyable part of that remote work experience. And like ultimately that's what I craved and missed when we started. Um, so we had moved from the Cayman Islands in 2012 back to Canada, and we had our young daughter there, and she was 6 months old when we moved back.
Huh.
So I completely understand like what it's like to have that young family and to prioritize work and family life. But that remote decision was one of, well, I'm probably like not going to get an office if I come back. I have this house and we can work from the basement. And there was really no plans to have employees or a team. It was just to essentially like help introduce Zero to Canadians. That's really what it came down to.
Was that move back to Canada, was having your daughter a motivator there?
No. That's why in the beginning I said, or you follow the shiny object syndrome sometimes. And it would have been really comfortable to stay down there, and like we had a place on the beach overlooking the ocean, and it
Did
was
you just go back to Canada to show Canadian Zero?
Isn't that
Oh my
crazy? I
gosh,
know.
that's terrible. Doesn't that seem completely ridiculous these days when like everybody's using cloud accounting and
Yeah.
a lot of people are remote?
Timing has a lot to do with decisions in life, that's for sure. But yeah, I had a great relationship with my boss at the time and the company I was working with and the friends and the beach volleyball every weekend. It was a really nice life, but ultimately it was the shiny object, the blue shiny object, to come back and try something new. And what was really cool is that my wife didn't think that we were crazy to do that. And
Yeah.
she bought into it too.
Bless your wife. That like your lifestyle and the whole RV thing and all that's wild, but that's another tangent.
Yeah. So the idea was that like we were together on these decisions. And I think that's a theme around like all of life's movements is that like when you're dialed in with your partner and you're making these decisions together, it is ultimately and it's ultimately better and magnified with its like ability to like reduce that friction if you're both on the same page. And I was super lucky. My wife has just always been a risk taker with that kind of that mentality. Like we vibe really well on like where we want to take our lives, and some of the biggest decisions we've ever made have been the easiest decisions. If I think back to some of the things we do in the company, they're a lot harder than the family decisions,
Mm-hmm.
which is really nice on the family side. So, fast forward, we have had this like it has always been remote. Hiring has always been remote. The in-person meetings have always been a cornerstone of like creating that culture. And like anything in life, there becomes a point when you've done that thing to the best you can, or you get into habits that you're not happy with, or things just start to not work because it's compounded over a certain amount of time. And like that was my life. I loved building the company with my business partner and all of our like early employees. I loved the work. I loved the technology. I loved the people. But ultimately, I wasn't loving who I was becoming because I was sacrificing my like life happiness for putting this thing out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And like I just remember like I had this basement apartment or not apartment, Freudian slip. I had this basement office with a door, and I would walk down the stairs and I would close the door at 8 a.m. and I'd come back maybe for lunch, maybe for dinner, and I'd be working after dinner, and my wife would just be with our daughter, and it just was killing me that I was missing out on some of this stuff, and I was so close.
Mm.
And I thought like this is not an example of who or what I wanted this to look like. And eventually we just looked at each other like, okay, so something has to change, right? Yeah. What do we do? And I think there was a theme of changing circumstances to make major changes because maybe I know I'm not strong-willed enough to create smaller habits that compound on each other to make one big change.
Mm.
So I was like, pull the rug out, we're leaving the house and we're gonna buy this RV and we're gonna get on the road and just see what happens.
So the plan was to have a smaller basement that was on the same level, and that would fix everything.
Just get out of the surroundings. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, but the best thing about that whole decision was that my wife, it was her idea.
Huh.
I just love that.
Huh.
It's like, she's like, maybe we should get this RV. Maybe we should go rent one and see what it's like. Maybe we should do this. And after we did, like, took our first kind of trip with one, it was her idea to say, let's do this more. Like, I really liked being together in that small space. And it's just like, wow, like, okay, the damage of being so close but so far away is like a real thing. And looking back, it's like you can connect the dots really easily and say, oh, if I just would have time blocked better, or if I just would have prioritized these things. I think every situation is different. If you know yourself enough, sometimes you have to do big sweeping things, and sometimes you're just full of willpower and you can do things on your own. But that wasn't me.
So how many years into firm running did you do the RV thing for the first time?
7. No, sorry, I can't do math. 3, 8, 5. So 5 years in.
So in those initial firm running years, basement dweller Chad.
Yeah.
Not father of the year.
Not father of the year. Tried, but not.
Let's like drill into that time frame. Because I think there's a lot of folks considering going into that. People that are maybe in the middle of that, like trying to figure out how do I make building a thing from scratch work with like family stuff. So I guess what would you do differently? Like how do you balance that drive to make a thing and like how that can be actually really fun and fulfilling?
Yeah.
But like ultimately make that work with everything else too.
Right. So the question is, you could go back in time, make a few changes. What would those changes be? What would you do? What would you do again? I would have given myself permission that it's okay to like push work to the next day. If you look back, I didn't give myself that permission.
Like everything felt more urgent than it needed to be.
I think so. Right. I think initially and in the beginning there was this sense of, okay, if we move faster, we will be able to afford that next hire quicker.
Yeah, how much of that was like I have to pay my bills versus just arbitrarily trying to grow, because there's that urgency of just like paying the mortgage. How much of it is that versus just growth?
I think it was more growth. I mean, everybody's situation is going to be different, but ours was about the paying the employees and getting that next person in to help, because back then there was a lot of customers that were interested in this that couldn't find people that could do it for them, and like it was an exercise of just prioritizing growth rates. So I don't know if I would slow down as much, but I would not push the extra hours as much as that kind of hurts me to say, because I know that would slow down the growth a bit. It would have given me a more wholesome, after dinner life or hour in the afternoon life. And look, it's only an hour to a day, maybe 3 hours
Mhm.
that you're talking here, but that compounded over 6 months or a year,
Right.
that really adds up.
Yeah. It's the not having that hour for 6 months on end. And
Yeah.
was there a, like, drilling in even further, was there a window there where you were first getting started where it was like, I'm not sure financially, like, we've got to get our first customers. And so, like, I'm going to work around the clock, like, it's just for like our own security. Was there a window there, or did you come into that with with enough cash to burn that it was never?
That wasn't a major issue because we had a lot of customers in the beginning. Now we did a lot of work we shouldn't have done, but we had customers that,
How did you
you
have a
know,
lot of customers in the beginning?
it was like my business partner had written a bunch of stuff, and his blog posts were getting lots of traffic.
Okay.
The tech community in Toronto was starting to hear about this accounting firm that was working with online tools, and
Okay.
like
So
there
customer acquisition
it
wasn't too bad in the
it
beginning.
wasn't bad in the beginning.
Okay.
No. No. So it was less about the financial thing and just more about, okay, how can we smooth this out over more people so that there's like an element of being able to handle this kind of intake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
When you think about like your first year, when you mentioned, your oldest didn't know the boundaries in the beginning, but now does. Any similarities to my story, or did you just have fundamentally better brain than me and could compartmentalize being at home?
Well, the whole basement thing's interesting because that's like, that is life going into an office. And you can't pop out. I mean, you could pop out for lunch with the family, but like, what made the basement hurt in my mind was that you could have and didn't. Like, the basement is much closer to the family than the office is. But like, most people still just go into an office and they work until they work, and they don't see those people from the time they leave home
Mm,
to get back home. But and so, like, that doesn't sound that, the basement doesn't sound that different to the office, but it's almost like what made that basement painful was that you could have, and that you were closer, right? And then you made that even harder for yourself by going to an RV. So it was even smaller. So that it was like, it was even harder to avoid them. But that's kind of interesting. So I went into an office every day, even through COVID, like, and it wasn't until this year that I've been working from home. Really, by and large, even when I was running a remote team and they were all from home and we had people around the world and around the country, I was still going into an office every day. And that was easier for the kids to understand. I'm at a place doing a different thing, and that's why I can't be with them.
mhm.
Being at an office can be, I think there are people who are wired to really enjoy work. And as much as it is like a terrible thing to say aloud, there's a lot of people like who are wired to, like, if they're going to they would ultimately rather spend 8 hours a day working than with the family. Like, that is what they enjoy. That's like what drives them. And it's probably a season of life thing. But fact of the matter is, like, that's where they want to be, is
Mhm.
in the office and working and building something.
Sure.
And they take a lot of fulfillment from that. And the office can be this like elixir that I think makes you not feel bad about being away. And there's very much like socially, like, it's like, and this has always been a problem with, particularly around tax in the US, I think, like, there's this degree of like sick pride that can be taken, and the absurd number of like, I'd had like 410-hour weeks in a row at one point,
Sorry,
and
what's the number? 410 hours?
four 110 hours weeks in a row, and my senior
Is that
finals
even possible?
my senior
What's the method?
finals week, I stayed up. I worked through 2 nights. My finals week was during tax season.
Whoa.
I had this back roads 35-minute drive between my college campus and the office that I worked at. So my last finals week of my senior year is happening during tax season. I have tests that I'm driving back and forth for, but it's busy season. So I literally went 2 full nights in a row without sleeping, doing this awful drive back and forth several times a day, where like how I didn't end up in a ditch, I don't know. Um, but we like the office and like the culture of work, and especially what public accounting in the US is like, you can absolutely trick yourself into I'm doing the right thing, or like I can take pride in just going into the office and working until the end of time, and it's easier in the office, I do think, because you don't have to see those people and the
The
people that
guilt.
maybe you're disappointing.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Like you're sort of distanced from the guilt. And so that's not really something I've had to grapple with until this year when I am at home. And it definitely is different. Like the days where I go down there at 6 a.m. and I work and I only come up for food, there is definitely a different level of like built-in guilt to that. But I never really had to grapple with that, I feel like, quite so much when I was going into an office. So there's your takeaway.
Yeah.
You don't want to feel guilty, get an office, and then you don't see their faces pressed up against the window saying, "Daddy, are you gonna come spend time with me? I'm working."
No, it's true. And like when it came time to like make up for this, like to put this in perspective, when we left, my youngest was 2 and my oldest was 6. So it was still somewhat of a young family.
Yeah.
And I had still built up all that guilt over the first kind of 5 or 6 years of her life. And like, don't get me wrong, we still spent a lot of time at home, but like it was just the the constant day in and day out that like those 1 hour blocks or 2 hour blocks just add up over time. So now, you fast forward and they're 12 and 8 and they've grown up essentially traveling across all the states and across all the provinces, and like their world is completely changed because our world completely changed.
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned, going to one place for a month at a time, that is the most special thing about, I think, my life right now, is that we used to be go, go, go. I want to show the kids all these things. I mean, they're not going to remember any of that stuff at that age. But you know what they remember now? It's like, oh, we live in Palm Springs now. Oh, we live on Vancouver Island. We live in Texas or Arizona. And like they remember the 1 month stays now. And we completely like changed our travel so that we spend 3 to 5 weeks in one spot now.
Okay.
So they get to meet people and go into the sports and gymnastics locally, and the skating and the groups. Like it's such a more like wholesome part of our life now that fits us today.
Huh.
And like there will be a time, just like when The Basement jumped the shark, that this does too. And then we do something else for that like season of life. And that's completely okay.
Do you think that like having with the RV, there's kind of this inherent like sense of adventure and other thing that the family is focused on?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like built into that process. And I've had times in life where like we had this family thing that we were looking forward to, or this thing that we were planning for and working on together that everybody was excited for. And then times where you didn't have that. I feel like that's been a helpful galvanizing thing for the family, is this shared thing that isn't work that everybody's working towards. And I feel like I've just unlocked that in the last couple of years, because like it's a thing that everybody can work on. And in many ways, like work is the thing that the person works on, and nobody else can understand it. And it's kind of this isolating thing. But yeah, I feel like having that shared thing has been helpful.
We let our kids pick the cities we go to now.
Oh,
It is incredibly funny where sometimes we don't, because they'll say like Alaska. I'll be like, I don't think we should do that in December. I don't even know if we can drive there then. But like, we'll say, okay, we're going from here to here, find the place in between that you want to go watch YouTube, go watch Google, and we'll stop. The last trip that we went through, we said, okay, we're starting in California and we're heading over towards Texas for next week. Find something to do. And they found Carlsbad Caverns. They're like, this looks cool. It looks like a cave. Of course it's a cave. And they're like, we want to go here. So it was a 3-hour one-way detour.
I was gonna say, so you had to go northwest to Carlsbad.
but it's not a big deal. So we went up that way, went through the mountains. It was such a cool drive, and stayed the day at Carlsbad, and then went back down to get onto the interstate to head over
You were in
east.
Carlsbad. You didn't do Legoland.
No, that was Carlsbad, California. We went to Carlsbad Caverns, which is in like New Mexico or somewhere Arizona border, New Mexico up there.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So, and yes, like we were in Carlsbad, but we didn't do Legoland because
Oh.
we're saving that for you.
Well, thank
Look
you.
at that. Anyway,
Now
but-
we have something to build
That's
towards.
right. But that is true. And like every year, and this is like we talk about like what we're doing for the families. We never used to ask our kids where we wanted to go, but now we do, and
Yeah.
like they're a part of the decision. But just like we're forcing this like lifestyle on them, or also like I'm more respectful like a lot now than I was maybe in the first year or two when it was all excitement. So every year, 3 or 4 months before school time, like we ask our kids like, "You ready to go back to school? You want to go back to, elementary and go out with all the kids and do these things?" And they're just like, "Tell me more. Like, what is it like? What is it there?" And they're like, "Here's what it's like." And they're like, "No, I'd rather go travel.
Huh.
I'd rather go do this. I'd rather just keep doing my school the way I'm doing my school."
Wow.
And
It's
like,
quite the democracy you're running.
it's
Maybe my little anarchists are just too young for this right now.
There.
But
It's been the last couple of years, like 2 years, where we've had these like big discussions about this, and of course, like we're really heavily relying on the 12-year-old because it's getting time to make a change there. But like it was a good season of life, and it was just a good reminder that like if you're forcing yourself to isolate and to build and to feel like it's all on you, like there is an element of that, but I bet you that like your partners or your family, like they're not as hard on you as you are, or as hard on yourself, and they just want to see you. So I feel like the world's moving in a better place right now where that's not the norm.
one of the things that I think is really hard about working for yourself rather than working for someone else, that's like a kind of been like a thing that's hung over me for as long as I had complete control over my availability, is like when you work for someone else, there's always somebody else to blame. Like you can say, you can say this season of life was really hard because I had to do this thing for this company. And there's that arbitrary framework of, well, you work 8 hours a day, and during tax season you work, X number of hours a week. And there was this like edifice that wasn't real, but at least made you more comfortable with at least made it easier to rationalize the amount of time that you spent on those different things. But once you have complete control over that, and you see how arbitrary like those hourly weeks are and all of that stuff, and you have full control to even spend 100% of the time with the family if you wanted to, it's been really hard for me to get to like the right answer at any given season of life for my kids and for me and all of that. And it's mainly been hard to manage a little bit of like inherent guilt that you can do that, and that you feel so privileged to be able to do that, but you still go to work. Have you grappled with that at all?
Yeah, I think I was really lucky too that there's a lot of people that I work with that were just incredibly like talented and built into building this thing, and I could lean on them a lot. They kept me in check. Like there's just so much like love for that early group that brought like it removed that guilt a little bit because I could.
Because it was the team that you were kind of growing with,
Yeah.
and developing,
Yeah. It felt like
That's
I was putting that there too. I don't know.
and they're better than your family.
No. But it was a thing of like developing your family life, developing the work life, and it's just like I think if I had to do it all over again, I might just prioritize profit versus growth.
Right.
And I would define profit myself as like not just monetarily from the company, but like what is a sustainable amount of money that would allow the team to live their best lives and to be able to serve our customers well, but also like what is the bank that I'm drawing on for family time, and like including that in the profit calculation. And that's wishy-washy, but it's how my brain works.
Your availability and your time is also a huge variable there. Like,
Yeah.
because making half as much money, but having, being able to eliminate 75% of your work and get a whole bunch of time back and have a business that's much more self-sufficient. Like, there's been times for me where like that's absolutely a trade-off worth making.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a luxury. Like to be able to say that is like a
Mm-hmm.
very big luxury, but
And you've publicly said that like you are not really interested at this stage in your life of like having a team or employees again.
yeah, and it's at least like right now, because that was the biggest stressor for me running a firm. It was simultaneously like the thing I drew the most satisfaction from and the thing that stressed me out the most. Like there
Mm.
was nothing more fulfilling than enabling a better career for people and helping them to grow. And knowing that even if I disappeared and the firm disappeared tomorrow, they are like going to be so wanted anywhere they go and be successful in all those things. And that was like the most fulfilling part of my work. But man, the thing that just kept me up at night was like the bigger your team gets, the more you end up being like the bottom of this funnel of like work challenges, of personal challenges for all of these people and stuff that's happening in their life that you end up like kind of carrying with them.
Mm.
That was probably the biggest thing for me was we had teams of people with just like complex things in their lives that impacted work that to a degree we had to be plugged into because they impacted work.
Yeah.
And just like carrying all of that for that many relationships, I learned was really hard for me. And that may not even be a work thing as much as it is a how many close relationships can you have in your life thing. Maybe I'm wired in a way where I carry enough of that's just going to be really hard beyond a certain number of people.
Yeah. But the silver lining to some of these things is that some of the closest relationships you make are because of your work life too. I think about people that I've met because of work. It's like, oh, those are people close to my life now. I really feel like if I looked back 10 years and I didn't have these people in my life, I'd be worse off.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that kind of gives you a bit of like, oh, maybe I should just keep going and see where this takes me in life. And it's almost like there's not very many bad answers. There's just like the answers that are right for you in your season of life. And I think that's a good takeaway for today.
Yeah, so like I think a helpful way to like synthesize all the stuff you've done in the past and kind of your experiences and all that is if you were to build this again tomorrow, if you were to do it all over again from scratch tomorrow with what you know and what you've done right and what you've done wrong, what would that look like for you starting it from scratch tomorrow? Let's say you got to empty the bank account. So like there is that urgency that most people are going to have when they're starting a firm.
Mm-hmm.
What is that discussion like? What's that transaction look like with the family and that negotiation of like, here's how we're going to reset expectations on what this looks like for how much I work, for what the day-to-day looks like with the family and all that.
And not to rehash what we said earlier, but it would be optimize for the profit that you need to sustain the life you want right now, and then grow based on whatever needs of you and your family and your company require. And like you can choose whatever company type and whatever growth path or stability path you want. But I think it all just comes back to like not growing for the sake of growing, but like growing for the sake of like sustainable, calm profit. And that's really nice. I think I would have prioritized like having a lot more time with my wife and young daughter, and not giving myself such a hard time later on. Yeah, I would have prioritized that, and like ultimately that would mean a different company, but it would. Um, I don't think it would have like pushed me to make like big, massive, drastic changes. So it's kind of weird where I don't have like a crazy ton of regret, but I think I still would have done some things differently. And that's true for anybody that looks back in their life 5 or
Yeah.
10 years. When you think about the same question, starting it all from scratch, what would you do differently?
I think so like one thing I talk about quite a bit is, especially when you're going out on your own, when you go out on your own, there's like, you have kind of the first number you want to get to is I want to make what I was making before. And like there's, for most people, there's like that really angst, like angsty period of how am I going to like get back financially to the level that I was. And like that is just, that's step number one. But then it happens usually quicker than you think. And then you get to 2x and you never could have imagined being at 2x. And then you look around yourself and you're like, well, let's keep going. When like, if you talk to yourself 18 months ago, you'd be like, no, you knucklehead, like build the best life you can around 2x. That sounds pretty good right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into it and you're like, well, I mean, what's another 3x? And so like if I were approaching this again, and so like on the financial side, I do think there's value in like just like documenting your frame of mind at a given point because it puts it all into perspective in a really helpful way. Because you just grow and you lose perspective of how unthinkable where you're at was to you not that long ago.
Yeah.
And something has to be like, in my opinion, something has to be enough. Like you have to have a number, you have to get to a point that's like, I can dial it back beyond this threshold. It doesn't mean you stop, but you at least don't have to keep like going super hard. So my framework would probably be something that budgets for time and money, where like the reality is when you're doing that initial build that is getting to just paying the mortgage, like that's a sweaty time. And I do think that there's probably a trade-off there where you say, hey, within this time frame, and you have to put a time frame on it because you can't do it forever.
Mm-hmm.
Within this time frame, we are going to make some trade-offs. And like that's kind of like, that's honestly one of my biggest fears. And I saw my dad do that. Like the whole trading time now for later thing, I think is almost always a trap.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you probably have to put a max time window on it. It's why building your firm as a side hustle is ultimately the best thing to do, because if you're already there when you start, that is 100 times better.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than like, building from zero or taking 36 months to get to the salary you had before. We would have to do some negotiation around like, what does going all out look like and how long are we willing to do it? Because at the end of the day, we are still accountants who can get a job virtually anywhere. That pays just fine. Like you can build a good life and make good money working for somebody else, right? So to a degree, like what are you doing this for if it is going to come at a huge sacrifice to do it for yourself?
Yep.
So we would have to do some negotiating around like, what are the terms of engagement to get to number X, so that we also have a separate kind of agreed upon what does this look like beyond that threshold, because that's got to be the reason that you're doing it, is what's on the other side of just that really initial like dark scary period, which goes by so fast for most people, I think. And oftentimes they will make long-term decisions based on that really relatively short window of time that's really scary. That may be 4 months or 6 months. Like it's, for most people, it goes by pretty like quicker than they would expect. But yeah, for me, the trade-off would have to be like, is this something that you can see yourself doing for 10 years? And what does that life look like over 10 years? Like, and for us, getting out of the firm at the end of the year, that was, my kids are starting to get into other stuff like gymnastics and rock climbing sports and stuff like that. And that was like, what is the better version that leaving the firm will enable? It was like me being able to take June to gymnastics and like being able to make dinners and just stuff that we didn't think was possible where we were, or felt really hard. So we did kind of like try to craft that reality ahead of time. And thankfully, like in my case, leaving the firm to the business that I run now, like it effectively was a side hustle, but coming into it, which if you can do it, this is the best way to do it. Coming into it, like financially, we were fine. Like there wasn't that window of gotta build. Otherwise I don't know how we're going to have the cash. So like that's best case scenario.
Yeah.
But for me, it would be negotiating what those dark days look like and how dark they can truly be, because ultimately you can still go back to what you're doing, but also like how is long term actually going to be better.
I met a guy, he was messaging me on LinkedIn and he was saying like, "Hey, I just took like half of my time and I have this new kid. She's 9 months old. I've spent the last 9 months doing like half the week working, half the week being with them, and I'm probably going to do this for another 3 or 4 months." And that was the plan that we set with our family.
Yeah.
I just love seeing that. And he's like,
Yeah.
"I'm fine." He's like, "Financially, we planned for this. This was a really important thing in our lives." And it's just like it's cool to see like that's the norm, or like that's what people are
Yeah.
thinking about now when they go through those stages of life.
Yeah. Like there was like if you think back to like working for somebody else and the traditional, and I know you couldn't hang in the traditional public uh accounting space and you never actually did it. Uh
Burn.
but like just the mindset, like turning up to work at a regional firm every single day, and seeing that sweaty culture and like the partner or out track, like stuff like that's just, I think, so incomprehensible for people. And I actually think like there's a lot of people that just ditch on the profession as a whole because they can't see anything but that.
Yeah.
Like your lifestyle is a fantastic advertisement for the profession.
You know, what would be better is if like a gas company would sponsor the diesel because that is expensive.
Fuel company. Yeah. Are you writing that off?
No comment. you, you really can't. Yeah, so no. Um, but anyway, that was good discussion. I like talking about this. I think everybody's got a different story, a different situation, but fundamentally we can choose like where to be, depending on where the economy is, right? I think this is another one of those moments where, the last 10 years have been different than the 10 years before it and the 10 years before that, and we're not sure what's coming up, but I
just heard about this great place.
The Mother's Gay
Don't worry about it. Lion King story just connected to my wife's cell phone via Bluetooth.
Polish raced across the fried lands in an
actually a good
effort to
story.
lose the watchful bird. They led him through many herds of animals until they thought.
What were you saying, Chad?
Wow, something about 10-year chunks, and I mean, how can we not just end off of Songs and Story, The Lion King by Robert Guillaume? Now I want to go listen to that. So it's been a slice, Jason.
It's been a slice.
Bye.